Good morning, all. Last week, we treated chapter 12 with the topic British colonial administration in Nigeria. In that chapter 12, we examined and discussed three categories of British administration in West Africa. Number one was Crown Colony, and people that resided in Crown Colony were regarded as British subjects. British laws were applied to them. Lagos became a Crown Colony in 1861. The second category of administrative setup in Nigeria was the protectorate. People that were regarded as protectorate subjects were people under the control and protection of Britain. The third one is an administrative setup called the Trust Territory. What is Trust Territory? Recall that Germany caused the First World War. When Germany lost the war, most of their colonial possessions in West Africa were taken from them. In the case of Nigeria, Southern Cameroon was divided into two. Southern Cameroon was given to Nigeria. So Britain was administering Nigeria and at the same time Southern Cameroon. Outside the people that lived in Lagos, which was regarded as Crown Colony, the rest of Nigerians were under protectorate. And in protectorate administration, Britain adopted or used the system of indirect rule. The system of indirect rule alienated and disempowered a lot of Nigerian citizens. Britain and British officials used the traditional rulers to run the daily administration of Nigeria. They excluded the educated elite and other groups except the traditional rulers. It was this excluded class of people that came together and said, look, since we are no longer needed, we have to do something to force, we have to do something to force ourselves into being relevant in British colonial government. And we say that as at 1920, they had grown up small group of educated Africans who had begun to think of themselves not as Yoruba, Igbo, or Efik, but as Nigerians. They saw the Nigerian nation to be and fought to free its people from colonial injustice and finally from colonial rule. They were the early Nigerian nationalists. And it was they that fought against the colonial masters until independence was won. In this chapter, we shall study the development of those nationalist movements which forced the colonial powers to grant independence to their erstwhile West African colonies barely 2 decades after World War II. We shall begin by examining the real meaning of nationalism. Before we look at the meaning of nationalism, we will look at the objective. And we say that at the end of today's lecture, our students will be able to trace the emergence of the nationalist movement, assess the roles of the different constitutions in constitutional development, determine the factors that aided the attainment of independence, trace the development of party politics and its impact. We look at the meaning of nationalism. And we say that nationalism, according to Onwubiko, is a patriotic sentiment or activity on the part of groups of Africans held together by the bonds of common language and common historic experience to assert their right to live under a government of their own, making for the preservation of their political, economic, and social interests. One perceives nationalism as a policy designed to achieve national self-determination or political independence by the removal of alien rule. Similarly, Oyenoye, Onyenwenu, and Olosade assert that nationalism is the recognition by people in a common geographical setting that they together belong to a nation with some common history, interest, and goals, and the need to free themselves from any socio-economic or political domination by other nations. Nationalism thus embraces both this awareness and the activities towards obtaining or maintaining independence. Having defined nationalism, what then is a nationalist movement? We see nationalist movements as political movements aimed at the removal of alien or foreign rule in colonial entities during the period of colonialism and struggle for political independence. At this juncture, we have to look at the early years of nationalist movement in Nigeria. In the early years of the struggle, that is, before the Second World War, the group of educated Africans in Nigeria did not think in terms of the independence of Nigeria. They knew that the British colonial rule had come to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. They, therefore, wanted merely to participate in the colonial administration. Some of the early nationalist movements in Nigeria include: 1. The National Congress of British West Africa, which was founded in Gold Coast by an Accra-based lawyer called Kingsley Hereford in 1920. The second one is the West African Students' Union, WASU. The West African Students' Union, which was established in London in 1925 by Ladipo Solake, who was a Nigerian law student in London. The third one is Pan-African Movement, which was a universal Negro association formed by the highly educated blacks in Europe, United States of America, and the West Indies, who still suffered racial discriminations between 1900 and 1919. One of the most influential members of this group was a man called W.E.B. Du Bois. Now let us look at the factors that contributed to the emergence of nationalism in Nigeria. And we say that several factors were responsible for the rise and growth of nationalism and nationalist movements in West Africa in general and Nigeria in particular. The factors had political, economic, cultural, and social undertone. The following are some of the identified factors that contributed to the emergence of nationalism in Nigeria and other West African countries. Number 1, denial of Africans the opportunity to participate in government. 2, disenfranchisement of Africans and lack of adequate representation in both the legislative and executive council. 3, monopolization of political power by the colonial masters. 4, the development of anti-colonial pressure groups such as Aborigine Right Protection Society, National Congress of British West Africa, West African Student Association, and the West African Youth League. 5, the emergence of Pan-Africanism. 6, The formation of political power parties led by strong and purposeful leaders enhanced nationalist activities in Nigeria. These early political parties were the NNDP, formed in 1923 and led by Herbert Macaulay, the NYM, founded in 1934 and was led by Ernest Ikoli, the NCNC, founded in 1944, led by Nnamdi Azikiwe, and the AG, founded in 1951, led by Obafemi Awolowo. The MPC was founded in 1951 and was led by Sir Ahmadu Bello. The NEPU was also founded in 1951 and was led by Malam Aminu Kano. Point number 7, exploitation of Africans by buying the local raw materials at very cheap prices while selling the imported goods at very exorbitant or high prices. Point number 8, there was domination of export and import trade by the foreign companies. Point number 9, payment of low salaries to Africans in the civil service, the police, and the army when compared with their European counterparts. Point number 10, denial of bank loans to Africans. 11, many Nigerians were conscripted into the British Army and fought in both the First and Second World Wars. They fought alongside people from other races and many countries, and they realized that the white man was no special being. Thus, they came home with nationalist ideas to depose the British. Point number 12, removal of African artworks only to be kept in museums in Europe. Point number 13, and the last, the relegation of African religion by treating it as primitive. Now we are going to look at the development of political parties in Nigeria. And we say that the development of political parties in Nigeria is a direct response or reactions of the Nigerian nationalists to the Clifford Constitution of 1922. The 1922 Constitution was named after the then governor of Nigeria, Sir Hugh Clifford. It seems to be a response to the 1920 Nigerian Congress of British West African demand for elective principles in West Africa. These parties were led by a new generation of nationalist leaders who had considerable mass support. By using Western methods of political agitation, these leaders were able to harness and direct the growing popular unrest of the post-Second World War period towards the achievement of freedom from colonial rule. The parties formed after the Clifford Constitution of 1922 are discussed below. Let us look at some of the political parties that were formed in 1922 when Governor Hugh Clifford established the elective principle. Number 1 is the Nigerian National Democratic Party, NDDP. It was formed in 1923 following the introduction of the elective principle in Nigeria in 1922 by the Clifford Constitution. Herbert Macaulay was the founder and leader of the NNDP. Point number 2, Nigerian Youth Movement. Nigerian Youth Movement was formed in 1934 by a group of young men led by Ernest Ikoli, Samuel Akisanya, and Dr. Valga. Number 3 is the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons. The National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons was formed in June 1944 when the Nigerian Union of Students held a meeting at the Glover Memorial Hall, Lagos. Herbert Macaulay and Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe were respectively elected the chairman and secretary general of the party. Point number 4, the Action Group. The Action Group was formed in March 1951 by members of the Egba Omo Oduduwa, the cultural organization formed in 1951 in London by some Yoruba students. Obafemi Awolowo was elected as its first president, while Bode Thomas became the Secretary General. Fifth one is Northern People's Congress, NPC. The Northern People's Congress elected Sir Ahmadu Bello as its first leader in 1952. NPC transited from the Jamai Jamal Arewa in 1949 and elected its first executive as political party in 1952. At this time, we want to look at the impact of nationalist movements in Nigeria. What were the impact? What were the results of the nationalist activities in Nigeria? And we say that the following are the achievements of the nationalist movement and effects of nationalism in Africa. Number one, it led to the end of colonialism in Africa. Two, it provided opportunity for the training of the new African elites in politics. Three, it enlightened the masses and increased their awareness about politics in New Africa. Four, it led to the independence and development of the new African states. Five, it led to the formation of political parties. Point number six, it led to the awareness of the people of their fundamental rights. Seven, it led to the indigenization of the top civil service posts. Eight, it led to the participation of Africans in the government. Nine, nationalist movement led to political and constitutional changes in West African countries. 10. Activities of the nationalist movement brought about improvements in education for West Africans. 11. Through the activities of nationalist movement, more Africans were allowed to take part in the economic activities of their country. This is where we will end today's lecture. Next week, we shall treat chapter 14, titled Nigerian Federalism. Thank you.